The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls as I sat in the dim-lit kitchen, my hands trembling slightly around the cold cup of tea. My name is Diana. Cedar Hill. My birthplace sat nestled in the corners of a map. A place that couldn't decide whether to freeze or bake. I could still taste the sharp bite of winter's breath on my tongue, the coldness sinking in with the sting of isolation. Summer, though, had always smelled like something I could never quite reach. Fresh grass, apple pie, cooling on the windowsill, the scent of something simple, something sweet. But like everything in my life, it was distant, unreal. Madison came into our world on the back of promises. I was 6, the age of wonder, the age when everything still seemed like it could be a fairy tale. My parents told me I'd have a best friend for life, but somewhere along the way, that promise became a whispered secret that only Madison could hear. I remember the day she was brought home. Banner's cake? A whole celebration set out just for her. And me. I was told to stand aside to wait for her. Don't touch anything. Deanna, it's all for Madison. My mother said, not even looking at me as she spoke her words like a command. I couldn't question. And just like that, the warmth I'd been promised slipped away, replaced with coldness. I didn't understand. Madison's world became the one everyone in the house inhabited. My parents, her adoring fans. Me, I was just the background noise, the girl who did everything, the one who poured the water, scrubbed the floors, did the homework. No one cared to check. My mornings the same ritual. Madison's pancakes, heart-shaped with strawberries, while I ate the leftover toast, cold and stale, the same as the looks I got from my parents. Every gesture of love reserved for her. I remember the day I needed new glasses. My old ones were too scratched up to see the board in class. I went to my dad, eyes wide, hoping for something, anything. Make do with the old ones, he said, his eyes already moving past me, focused on something else. But when Madison asked for a new bike, a pink one with a basket of flowers, my father didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he handed over his card, the transaction as smooth as butter. For the longest time, I thought maybe it was me. Maybe I was imagining things. But when I was 12, reality crashed into me like a slap. I couldn't ignore. I had made it to the state finals of a writing competition. It was an honor, an achievement, something that should have made me feel seen. I showed the invitation to my mother, clutching it with excitement. She barely glanced at it before setting it down on the kitchen counter, her voice flat. Madison's birthday is this weekend. Don't expect me to do anything else. Try to get there on your own. 2 hours alone on a bus. The manuscript printed on an old printer was a heavy weight in my hands. I didn't win. I sat in the auditorium alone, surrounded by families, cheering, clapping for their children. I sat there, invisible, like I'd never truly existed in their eyes. Madison was the sun. I was the shadow she cast. She had everything handed to her. The nicest clothes, the most expensive toys, the kind of admiration I could never reach. I became her backdrop. She borrowed my things without asking, broke them, and blamed me. And when I stood up for myself, "Don't be selfish, Deanna," my mother would say as Madison took what was mine. That day, when I refused to let her have the new jacket that had been sent by Grandma. "Madison needs it for a party. You can wear the old one." I knew with a hollow certainty that my place in this family had always been to be invisible. So I swallowed the hurt, buried the anger, and found solace in my books, in my schoolwork, in the grades I aced. At least in school, I could be something I could breathe. I didn't have to beg for love, and I promised myself silently that one day I'd leave Cedar Hill. I'd step out of Madison's shadow and never look back. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Michigan. When the acceptance letter came, I held it in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone, anyone, had seen me. I hoped foolishly for a moment of recognition from my family. But that night at dinner, all my mother said was, "That's nice, but Madison's auditioning this weekend for the junior vocal group at the Town Art Center. We need to focus on her." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. I nodded. The hollow feeling inside me didn't hurt anymore. I had learned to live with it. I left Cedar Hill that fall with just a suitcase and a heart full of dreams larger than the sky. No farewell party, no hugs, no promises to stay in touch. Just the quiet hum of the bus, carrying me away from the place I'd never truly belonged. At college, I reinvented myself. No one called me Madison's sister. I was Diana, the one who always spoke first in class, who pitched the boldest ideas in group projects. The one professors emailed to say, "Your presentation exceeded expectations." I worked part-time at a cafe, studied in the mornings, worked in the afternoons, and stayed up late finishing assignments. No spring breaks, no weekend trips, just a plan. Graduate early, get real-world experience. No family came to visit me, no phone calls, but I was fine. I chose work over family because family had never been a safe place. And 3 years later, I graduated with honors. Harper & Lane offered me a full-time position. My dream job at one of the top marketing firms. I moved to Chicago, rented a small apartment in the West Loop, and started to build the life I always deserved. Free from Madison's shadow, free from the weight of my mother's indifference. But even here, in the concrete jungle of Chicago, the echoes of Cedar Hill still whisper, reminding me of the girl who learned to live in the silence. The girl who learned to fade away unnoticed. The girl who swore she'd never go back. But there's a part of me that wonders, how much of that promise was me truly stepping into the light, and how much of it was just running from the dark? Every morning, as I walked into the office, the hum of the city below felt like the heartbeat of a world that finally recognized me. I settled into my chair by the 12th floor window, gazing out at the rush of the streets below. In those quiet moments, I felt peace settle in my chest. The girl who once cowered behind the curtain watching Madison's every achievement was gone. Now, I was Diana, no longer a shadow, but a woman with her own voice, her own path, her own power to decide the direction of her life. But even with this newfound strength, there were still moments when the past crept back in. A text from my mother, a quick note about Madison, her latest internship with a fashion brand, or her appearance on TV performing for the mayor. "Did you see? Isn't it amazing?" My heart would harden, the words stinging as they always did. Never once did she ask about me. Not once did she acknowledge my achievements, the things I worked so hard for. I'd reply, "That's great. Congrats to her." But the emptiness would settle again as I put my phone down. It was during an internal meeting that things began to shift. I'd been working on a campaign, one I called Human Brand, where I integrated emotional connection into every layer of the marketing strategy. When I presented it, the room fell silent. Then the director, with an almost reverent tone, nodded. "This campaign? It really hits, Diana. You made me reflect on myself." That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop to check the company dashboard. My first-year performance bonus, 6 figures. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring, as tears welled in my eyes. Not for the money, but because someone, for the first time in my life, had told me that I moved them, that I made a difference. I printed out that email and taped it to the fridge, a reminder of something my childhood home never gave me recognition. But the silence of my own success didn't last long. One weekend, As I sat by the window, absorbed in a book, my phone rang. Mom calling the screen. Read. I hesitated. It had been months since we'd spoken, and yet part of me wondered what this call would be. So I picked up. What followed was an invitation to Madison's engagement party. You should come. The whole family will be there, she said, as if I wasn't already a stranger to them. I meant to decline. But instead, I heard myself say, yes, maybe I needed closure. Or maybe I just needed to see with my own eyes how radiant Madison had become the star everyone had always expected her to be. So I went back to Cedar Hill. I sat in the corner of the party, unnoticed, like an outsider in my own family. No one asked about my life, my work, my success. Mom spoke to me in those soft, hollow tones, the ones meant only for appearances. But then there was Andrew. Andrew was the groom's best friend, a freelance photographer temporarily back in town for a community project. We spoke for only a few minutes at the party, but that brief interaction led to hours of texting afterward. He didn't look at me through the lens of being Madison's sister, or as a resume or a series of accolades. He looked at me, really looked at me, and he listened. He saw me, and for the first time, someone truly cared about what I had to say. We started a long-distance relationship, and one late autumn day, Andrew packed up an old camera and 2 stray cats he was fostering, and moved to Chicago a year later before he could even kneel. I blurted out, yes, to his proposal, laughing all the way home. Marriage with all its challenges wasn't easy. We were both chasing our passions, but Andrew always found ways to make me feel loved through small gestures, like a cup of coffee when I woke up, or a sticky note on my laptop that read, "You're still amazing today." At 32, we welcomed our son, Elliot. He had Andrew's gray eyes and a smile that made me feel like I wasn't missing anything in life. I used to fear motherhood. I worried that I would replicate the way my mother had treated me, that I would fail my own child. But Elliot taught me that love isn't something you fight for. It's something that blooms naturally when you truly want the best for someone. I walked around the living room in the middle of the night, holding my baby and lulling him to sleep with soft jazz playing in the background. Andrew sat at the corner table editing photos. But every time I sighed, he would look up and say, "Let me change the diaper." He said it like it was a rescue, and in that moment, I realized this was the family I had once dreamed of. Elliot grew up in a small apartment filled with drawings and storybooks, where every cry was met with patience, not frustration. And when I looked at my son, I knew that the shadow of my past no longer loomed over me. I had built the family I had once dreamed of. A family built on love, understanding, and the strength of knowing that sometimes you have to rewrite your story. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough so that Elliot would never have to ask, "Mom, do you love me?" The way I used to wonder for years. Those words, those questions never seemed to find their place in my home. But everything, as it always does, began to shift. When Elliot turned 3, Andrew accepted a project in Seattle, a major one, lasting 6 months. I supported him, of course. His career mattered just as much as mine. But with the distance came the quiet stretching between us. The calls grew shorter, replies to texts slower. I could feel it, the subtle unraveling. Then, one Tuesday night, just after I put Elliot to bed, the phone rang. It was Andrew. "Deanna, I think we need to talk." His voice wavered, and I felt it, the shift, the inevitability. "I've met someone in Seattle. It didn't start out serious, but now..." He trailed off, and I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Instead, I felt that familiar emptiness flood me like an old song playing in the background. One I hadn't heard in years. The feeling was the same. The hollow ache of rejection, of being overlooked. It wasn't just the man I loved most who was slipping away from me. It was everything. The world I'd built, the family I thought was solid, was now just me and Elliot. He apologized over and over. He promised he'd still be a father to Elliot, that he wouldn't disappear. But in that moment, I knew the man I thought I knew wasn't there anymore. He'd chosen a path that didn't include me. And as I sat on the floor, leaning against Elliot's crib that night, I silently promised him that I would never let him grow up the way I did. I would never let him feel unseen or unloved. He would always know that he mattered, always know that he was my priority, my love, my everything. The next day, Andrew packed his things. There were no shouting matches, no heated words. Everything ended as quietly as it had begun. The next morning, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where his coffee mug used to sit. I didn't fall apart, not for Elliot. He needed an adult who could face the world, who wouldn't crumble every time he went to sleep. And just when I thought everything was falling apart, something unexpected happened. Something I never saw coming. Andrew's family. The very next day, I got a call from Sarah, Andrew's mom. "Diana," she said softly, "he told us everything. We don't know what to say, but what we do know is this. You and Elliot are still part of this family." I held the phone in silence for a long moment. For a split second, I had believed that when Andrew walked away, his entire side of the world would walk away with him, but they didn't. Sarah still called me dear, and in that moment, it felt like a lifeline, like something I could hold on to. Tom, Andrew's father, stopped by the next weekend. He brought a bag full of Elliot's old toys, and when he bent down to Elliot's level, holding out an old toy truck, he smiled. "This little guy said he missed you, so I brought him to visit." Elliot squealed with excitement and hugged Tom like nothing had changed. And in that moment, I realized that with my son, love hadn't changed, not one bit. But the person who truly brought me to tears was Rachel, Andrew's youngest sister. She'd always been the quiet one, the one I never expected to reach out. But one cold, rainy Saturday afternoon, she knocked on my door, bringing homemade ginger cookies and a tiny t-shirt that said, "My aunt is awesome." "We might not be sisters-in-law anymore," Rachel said, her voice quiet but full of sincerity. "But I'll always be Elliot's aunt." I couldn't speak. The weight of those words wrapped around me like a blanket offering warmth where I hadn't known I needed it. Every weekend, Elliot was picked up by his grandparents. Sarah taught him how to bake. Tom showed him how to plant tomatoes in the backyard. Rachel spent hours drawing with him. I called them magic classes. Elliot called it his second home. One late afternoon, when I came to pick Elliot up, Sarah invited me to stay for dinner. The dining table still had my old seat, the one I'd sat at when I was part of the family. But this time, I wasn't Andrew's wife. I was just me, a single mom, welcomed with warmth and respect. As we finished washing the dishes, Sarah placed her hand on my shoulder. "Diana," she said, "I know you're strong, but being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone." Those words, those simple yet profound words, etched themselves into my soul. They weren't pity. They were a reminder that I wasn't alone. A few months later, when Elliot turned 4, I hosted a small birthday party for him at a park nearby. Just a few close friends, co-workers, and Andrew's family. After Elliot blew out his candles, Sarah hugged me and whispered in my ear, "We may not be related by blood, but our hearts still choose you." That night, as I tucked Elliot into bed, he wrapped his little arms around my neck and said, "Mommy, I love you. I love Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Rachel too." I held him close, my tears soaking into his pillow. Maybe I lost a husband, but in return, I gained something far more precious, a real family. One not bound by titles or blood, but by choice, by love, by the understanding that sometimes you can rewrite your story when you least expect it. I watched my son sleeping the soft glow of the nightlight, casting a delicate halo over his tiny face. In that moment, as I watched his chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath, I made a vow. No matter what happens, I will never let him grow up without love, and if the world ever turned its back on me again, I would turn it around, just to keep him in the light, to make sure he always felt seen, valued, and cherished. As time passed, life with Elliot settled into a steady rhythm. It was gentle, almost like the world had finally found its balance. My job at Harper & Lane had exceeded even my own expectations. After 2 back-to-back successful campaigns for major brands, I was promoted to creative director for the Midwest region, a role most in the industry spent over 10 years striving for. My first bonus was more than I had ever dreamed of, so I used it as a down payment on a small home in the suburbs of Naperville. A place with a big backyard for Elliot to run in and a sun-filled home office where I could breathe in peace. I jokingly called it my post-divorce paradise, but the calm, like all things in my life, was fragile. A week after moving in, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Mom, the woman who had practically vanished after Madison's engagement party. "Deanna, I heard you bought a house. That's amazing." Her voice chirped through the phone, unnervingly cheerful. "We'd love to visit, if you don't mind." I paused. I was caught between curiosity and the need to protect Elliot. But I said yes. Maybe it was for him. Maybe it was for me. The truth was, I didn't know anymore. When they arrived that Saturday afternoon, they brought a small gift bag and a box of ginger cookies. My mom hugged Elliot like she hadn't missed his birthday 3 years in a row. Dad couldn't stop complimenting the new kitchen, the fridge, even the hallway rug, as though these things somehow made up for the years of absence. Elliot, with his young heart untouched by rejection, was instantly friendly. He showed them his drawings, gave them a tour of the house, even handed Grandma a paper crown he had made himself. And I stood there at a distance, unsure whether my heart should melt or freeze. In the weeks that followed, my parents became more involved. They offered to watch Elliot for a few hours on weekends so I could rest, even brought pastries to share. Elliot began calling my mom Grandma Linda, and he'd excitedly recount how she read him fairy tales or how Grandpa gave him candy from his coat pocket. I tried to tell myself to welcome it in. Maybe everyone deserves a second chance. But then, the thing I had always feared began to show itself. It started with what seemed like a harmless dinner conversation. "Diana, we're getting the roof fixed. It's been leaking all winter," my dad said, his eyes drifting around my bright kitchen. "Things must be going well at your job. If you could help a little, we'd be so grateful." I nodded. It wasn't much, just a few $100s. I sent it, thinking of it as a simple thank you for the care they were starting to show. Then came Mom's dental bill, the broken old fridge, the late utility payment. I tried not to judge. I sent the money, not as the forgotten child I used to be, but as a responsible adult. But then, everything changed. After I closed a major deal with a startup in Silicon Valley, my LinkedIn post went viral across the industry. Less than 24 hours later, I received a text from Mom. "Congrats, sweetheart. By the way, your dad's thinking of getting a used SUV for the winter, much safer. If you could help with the down payment, that'd be amazing." I read the message and my heart sank. Not a single word about Elliot. Not a single word of gratitude for the help I'd already given. It was just another request, like I was their personal bank on speed dial. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think. That night, as I folded Elliot's clothes for the next day, he suddenly said, "Mom, Grandma gave me Madison's old toy today. She said not to break it, because Madison always took really good care of it." He looked up at me, eyes serious. "I take care of my toys, too, don't I?" "Mommy?" The words cut through me a tiny scratch on my chest. The favoritism had never truly gone away. It had just changed shapes. Softer, more subtle, but still sharp enough for a 4-year-old to feel it. I froze. I pulled Elliot into my arms, holding him close. "Yes, sweetheart. You take really good care of your toys, and I'm so proud of you. Every single day." That night, I opened my phone and replied to my mother with just one sentence. "I'm sorry, but from now on, everything I build will be for Elliot, not to make up for what you never gave me." I didn't know how she'd respond, but I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let history repeat itself through my son. Not again. The next day, everything started like any other. I was presenting a new campaign to the board when a sharp pain shot through my lower abdomen, cutting me off mid-sentence. Everything after that played out like a fast-forward film. The world spun around me as my co-worker helped me out of the room. I could hear shouts for help, the frantic urgency in the air, the flashing lights of the ambulance cutting through intersections, and then everything went dark. When I woke up in the ER, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. I felt cold sweat clinging to my skin, the IV in my arm, a sharp contrast to the pounding pain in my gut. The doctor looked down at me, his expression serious. "Ms. Diana, you have acute appendicitis. We need to operate immediately. This can't wait." His words were urgent, but all I could think about was Elliot. He was at preschool and school ended at 3:30. The clock on the wall ticked away, a constant reminder that I had less than 2 hours. "I need to call someone. Someone has to pick up my son," I whispered, my voice barely audible. They handed me my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed my mother's number. Despite everything, a part of me still hoping just this once she would be the mother I had always dreamed of. She answered on the 4th ring. "Diana." "What's going on?" I felt a wave of relief at the sound of her voice, but it quickly faded. "Mom, I'm at the hospital. I need emergency surgery. Can you pick up Elliot? He'll be done at 3:30. I can't leave him there." There was a long pause. Too long. A coldness seeped into her voice. "Oh, I don't think I can. We're getting ready for Madison's promotion party tonight. The restaurant's booked. Nearly 60 people are coming." The words felt like a slap. I tried to stay calm, to hold it together for Elliot. "Mom, I'm lying in a hospital bed. Elliot needs someone to pick him up. He's your grandson." She sighed, a sound that cut deeper than any blade. "Diana, why do you always make everything so complicated? We're really busy, and Elliot's always running around asking questions. It's hard to manage. I don't think watching him today is a good idea." Watching him. The words hit me with a coldness that sank into my bones. "Elliot's not a burden," I said, my voice trembling. "He's your grandson." But she simply replied, "Honestly, we can't handle him. He's a handful." The finality of her words, the way they sliced through every old scar I had left, me paralyzed. Then she hung up. I dropped the phone. My body went numb. I didn't know what hurt more, the inflamed appendix or the way my mother had just severed the last thread connecting us. The nurse came rushing in to prep me for surgery, and just before they wheeled me away, I made one last call. "Rachel?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "I'm here." "Diana, what's wrong?" She picked up immediately, her voice steady. "Sure, I'm at the hospital. I need surgery." Elliot's school lets out at 3:30. Can you pick him up? I'm on my way, she said, without hesitation. Text me the school address. Elliot will stay at my place tonight. Tom and Sarah will be thrilled to see him. I cried then, but not because of the pain. I cried because in that moment when every door seemed to slam shut, a light came through. The surgery was a success. When I woke up, soft light filtered down from the ceiling, and there beside me was a photo of Elliot. He was grinning wide-eyed and happy, sitting next to Rachel and her dog Bully. Underneath in blue marker was a message. I slept so good. Bully shared his blanket too. Love you, Mommy. 2 days later, Rachel picked me up from the hospital. As we drove, she said quietly, Diana, I don't understand our parents, but I do understand one thing. Elliot isn't a burden. He's light, and you are his whole sky. That night back home, I took down every photo of my biological family from the walls. I replaced them with photos of Elliot laughing, running, playing in his grandparents' backyard. I didn't need an apology. What I needed was to protect Elliot from love that came with conditions. And I made a promise right then and there that from that moment on, I would never let anyone treat my son as less than, no matter what title they carried, no matter the history between us. I recovered from the surgery faster than expected. Partly because my body was strong, and partly because my spirit had received the clearest wake-up call of my life. During my time in the hospital and in the quiet days of recovery at home, I had a lot of time to reflect on my mom, on my dad, on Madison, on the woman I had been far too patient with a family that only ever saw me as a backup plan, something to fall back on when they needed me. The night I came home after Elliot had fallen asleep, I opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account and canceled every recurring transfer to my parents. I didn't need their approval, and I certainly didn't need to carry their weight any longer. The only weight I had to carry now was the one that belonged to me and to Elliot, and that I realized was more than enough. I removed them as beneficiaries and opened a new savings account for Elliot, labeling it the Freedom Fund. It wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper, something I knew from my core freedom. Isn't about running away from someone. It's about no longer letting them control your life. The next day, I blocked my mother's number, then my father's. I blocked their emails, their texts, every social media account where they could reach me. I used to stay polite. I didn't need to be polite anymore. I needed peace, and so did Elliot. A week later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my mom. She knew I wouldn't answer her calls, so she tried the old-fashioned way. A cream-colored envelope, 3 full pages written in that familiar cursive. It started sweet, wove through guilt-tripping in the middle, and ended with blaming me. She wrote that they were having serious financial trouble. Emma couldn't help as expected. Dad had been denied a loan for a new car. The house was at risk of foreclosure. If they couldn't cover the winter bills, you are her only hope, she wrote. I folded the letter without reading it again. I had once been their only hope, but not because they loved me. It was because I was useful. A few days later, my mother called Rachel, asking her to pass along a message. Rachel refused. Deanna doesn't owe anyone an explanation, she said, her voice calm and resolute, especially not people who once called her child a burden. Then came a message from Madison. You're being dramatic, you know. Sure, Mom and Dad made mistakes, but they're still our parents. I read that message while planting tomatoes with Elliot in the backyard. He wore a funny little knit hat and giggled as dirt covered his hands. I simply replied, when you have kids, you'll understand. Since that day, I haven't received another call or letter. Maybe they finally realized that I'm no longer the old Diana who would sacrifice everything for a single crumb of approval. I've learned to stop begging for love and to start creating safety for myself and my son. A month later, Elliot and I were walking at the park when we ran into his former preschool teacher. She looked at me, and I could see the recognition in her eyes. "You seem healthier and happier than I've ever seen you," she said. I smiled. I just learned the most important lesson of my life. Not everyone who shares your blood is truly family. That evening, while Elliot was curled up in my lap watching cartoons, he looked up at me and asked softly, "Mom, how come Grandma and Grandpa don't come visit anymore?" I hugged him tighter, running my fingers through his hair. "Because I want to protect you from people who don't truly love you," I said. "And you deserve to be loved with a whole heart, not with conditions." Elliot nodded, then went back to watching his show, like the world kept turning in the simplest way. But for me, that moment was the clearest sign I had done the right thing. I don't know how my parents are doing now. I don't know if they still hope I'll come back, or if they've shifted all their expectations onto Madison. I don't check in. I don't ask. I don't care. Because now I don't live for approval anymore. I live. So Elliot knows that real love never comes at the cost of your dignity. For Elliot and me, after all the cuts, after all the firm choices, life feels light. Not because there aren't hard days, sleepless nights from work, or sudden fevers, but light because I no longer carry the weight of needing to be accepted. I no longer flinch at every message or phone call from people who once called themselves family. We started rebuilding our lives in our own way. Early mornings with coffee brewing, while Elliot doodled at the kitchen table, Sunday dinners at Tom and Sarah's. Tom always made Elliot's favorite barbecue, and Sarah knew my taste down to the last spoonful of sauce. Rachel, with her ever-present camera, captured the most beautiful frames of this little family I never thought I'd have. One day, after gardening, Elliot sat on the porch steps with crayons and drawing paper. He was sketching a big tree with wide branches, each one holding a person. "What kind of tree is that, sweetie?" I asked, sitting beside him. "A family tree," Elliot replied, pointing to each one. "This is you. This is me. This is Grandpa Tom, Grandma Sarah, Aunt Rachel, and Max." Max was the little dog Rachel had recently adopted. Now, Elliot's best buddy. That's when I realized not a single name from the past appeared on that tree. No Linda. No James. No Madison. Elliot had chosen his family, and he had chosen right. At night, when Elliot was fast asleep, I'd often sit alone in the living room. Soft yellow light spreading across the wooden floor. I'd think about the days in Cedar Hill when I was the quiet girl behind the door, watching Madison get showered with praise while I was left with a bowl of cold cereal. Now I wasn't standing behind any doors anymore. I had stepped out, carved my own path, and built a home where happiness flourished. I didn't need anyone's permission. One afternoon, Rachel and I took Elliot to the fall festival at Central Park. He asked to ride the ponies, and Rachel beamed. "Aunt Rachel is the official photographer today," she said, snapping dozens of pictures of Elliot, his eyes sparkling in the golden autumn sun. That night, while I was cleaning up, Elliot suddenly hugged me from behind and whispered, "Mommy, do I have a real family?" I turned around and knelt to his level. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" A kid at school said, "My parents are divorced, so I'm alone, but I'm not alone, right?" I hugged him tightly, choking up. "No, baby, you're not alone. You have me, Grandpa, Grandma, Aunt Rachel, Max. You have a whole world that loves you more than anything." Elliot nodded firmly, as if he needed to hear it just one last time to believe it. "Then I'm going to draw a heart on our family tree." I smiled gently, brushing his hair from his face. "And I'll always be the strongest branch for you to lean on whenever you need." The days that followed passed peacefully. I no longer looked for calls from the past, no longer waited for overdue apologies. Because now, I already had everything I'd ever longed for. Not through blood, but through choice. I chose genuine love. I chose safety for my son. I chose myself. Diana's story is a powerful reminder that not everyone who shares your blood deserves a place in your life. Real love doesn't come from duty. It comes from choice and respect. When we have the courage to cut ties with toxic relationships, we don't just save ourselves. We create a healthy space for the next generation to grow. Diana chose unconditional love for her son and for herself. A brave, wise, and beautiful choice. What do you think of Diana's decision? Would you have done the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more touching stories about family and life.